used to feel like nobody cares, you know, and because you're human, and you know what you're experiencing can really bog you down. And I thought, who even cares? Like, how is this meaningful? What does it matter? But there was a kid, really nice kid. I still remember her name, and that's unusual. I forget names. She was a senior. I think she had me 2 years, advanced or AP art and like intro art. And I remember she came up to me one day and she's like, can you read my personal statement for college? She was going to college. And I was like, yeah, and she's like, I wrote about you. And I was like, what? What? And like, she was really nice. She was like a really nice kid in my class. But, sometimes you think that the kids that you engage with the most are the ones that you most affect. But so, you have a lot of sponges that you don't even know about. And it's those quiet sponges that have indicated, that have shown me, are the ones that are taking it in a different way. And so she wrote about, her life and like an impact that my class had on her, and I was floored. And over the years, this is a unique gift we have living in the internet age, is that teachers before the internet age, would teach and do what they do in their classroom, and the kids would go off and they would never see them again, right? But our kids, because, well, you can also connect with them on social media. Mm. And so I tell my kids, no, I'm not following anyone. No one can follow me until after you graduate. Literally graduation day already, But like, I've had kids that messaged me from years and years ago will tell me the thing that you did, the little seed finally sprouted, this, and you talking about identity and culture, and I'm so glad. And I'm like, and so you got to see that. And that's, I don't know, I feel like, I'm like, damn, I feel bad for the people that didn't get experience this before. It's cool to see that. And it also gives you perspective, because when you're a teacher that's just dealing with the problem at hand and you think like, none of this matters, is stupid, these kids don't care, you don't see the bigger picture. It's so easy to just, continue having that attitude and doing less in your classroom instead of seeing it for what it is. If this kid seems uninterested and rude or whatever, there is probably a whole lot of other things, but it doesn't mean they're not paying attention and taking something in, You know what? My mom taught me a stitch when I was a kid, a single like stitch, because her mom would embroider. My grandma would embroider, and so she taught me a stitch at like 8 years old. And I just started making stuff. I was like, that's all I need to know. And so I know, but I don't know. Like, I only know like one way to do it, but I'm like, that's enough. I can make things go together, and that's good enough. And I would make and modify clothes for myself. I made my mom a little purse that she still keeps, and she like a little coin bag at like 8 or 9. And I said, I made you this, and she's like, with a button and everything. And she's like, how? I'm like, well, the thing you taught me, So I still use it, but I wish
I think you just wanna be called. You officially know the names and all that lingo.
Yeah, like I couldn't tell you even what kind of stitch it is. I just know that I know a stitch. I'd like to know how to embroider like my grandmother did. My mom probably knows how.
Hi.
Hi.
Jackie, let me introduce you. This is Jacqueline Torres. She is a local artist from San Fernando Valley, and I want to tell this story on how we know each other, because it's kind of
funny. It's nebulous because we couldn't really give a clear story about that.
Jackie organizes Dia de los Muertos festival at San Fernando High School, and since I'm part of AJUPM, we get invited to do
Demonstration.
a demonstration for the Ulama game. And when I first saw her, I kept staring at her. And I don't know if you noticed I was staring at you, but I was staring at you because I'm like, her face looks so familiar. Mm-hmm. I know that face. And I want to know where, I'm like looking through my catalog of memories. Mm-hmm. Where do I know her from? And then somehow CSUN pops out. And
we don't know with certainty, yeah.
Yes.
And we did this for like a good year, and I think we did it both years, right?
Yes.
Like the last 2 years, we saw each other, we don't know why, but we feel like we both had the same feeling. Mm-hmm. We were like, it's like we have the same terrible memory. We're like, I know you, but I don't know from where.
But I do know that I know you.
Yeah.
In my heart, I do know that I know you.
Yeah.
That is for sure. Something that I really want to get started with, and why I really wanted to invite you here, is that your name has popped in many circles that I've come across. Yes, because they talk very highly of your art.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Of my art.
Yes.
I feel like I haven't been as disciplined with it lately, but that's nice, I thought,
Yes.
I do know that San Fernando, the area that we live in, that we work in, feels like a small town. Silmar, San Fernando, Pacoima, which is where I've lived, that area, feels very small town. It's impossible for me to go anywhere without seeing either former classmates or former students or current students, family. Like, I constantly see people everywhere. So I think there has that's an element to it as well,
But it's, for me, I just always feel honored, because it's like, I know that person personally, at least enough where I can go, hi.
Oh. Thank you.
But something that it really, that we were talking about earlier, is about stories. And I think that's what your art does say a lot. And I love stories. I'm more of the listener than the storyteller. I don't think I'm a good storyteller, but I love hearing the stories, and I can visualize them. So I think that's what the drawings that I have seen from you is the feeling that leaves me behind. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but you are also a teacher. Mm-hmm. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Where do I start? I mean, I can start from the when I was a kid, and I remember wanting to be a teacher.
I want to hear that.
If you were to talk to 8-year-old Jackie and ask her what she wanted to be, I think I was as indecisive then as I am now. But I could tell you a few things that I want to do. And so if you'd asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said teacher. So far, check. Teacher, artist, check. Musician. I used to have a keyboard, but my parents didn't know where to send me for piano lessons or anything like that, so it was something that never got developed, so, but I'm always around music. My family, play music, so yeah, I want to be a musician. And the last one, so I wanted to be a comedian at 8 years old. That didn't happen, but there's still time. You never know.
Still time.
So, and I wanted to be a teacher because I love school. I love my teachers. I can name every single teacher I had since pre-kindergarten, and I can tell you something about those teachers, what they made me feel, or how I felt in the classroom. I just loved being in the classroom space. And so I remember seeing my teachers and thinking in their classes, like, that's something I'm going to do one day. That's something I want to do in my class. That's a way I want to make my students feel, And I don't want to say I lost sight of it. It just wasn't such a strong or intentional focused goal. Maybe in high school later on, I remember that the more important thing was like to get to college, and so I think in college that wasn't the intention. When I got to college, I knew I wanted to go, but I didn't have a study that I wanted to do, but I always liked to draw. I always kept sketchbooks. I always drew portraits of family members and friends on my own. I didn't have any classes. Art was not made available in the school that I went to. And so I took art. My idea back in college was, well, I'll major in art because it's something to do for the meantime until I find something more practical, and so when I started taking the classes, which is probably where we, cross paths, I fell in love with it, and I thought, this is very challenging and also very stimulating and interesting. I loved just all the different things that I got to do, black and white, darkroom photography. Did you do that?
I did.
Yeah, that is so cool.
That was so relaxing.
Yeah, life drawing classes, portraiture classes, painting. Even though I'm not into digital art, I'm a total dinosaur. But all that stuff is really interesting and stimulating. So I stuck with it. But then when I graduated, when I got my bachelor's, I felt like I was without a direction, and it was a series of things that led me to teaching. So even then, I did not pursue it. Remember, I started as a teacher's assistant at a high school, and then I realized, well, I could sub, and I started subbing for a few years. And I thought, when I would have long-term assignments, I thought I could do this. And so I went into it. And initially, my intention was not to teach art, it was to teach English. I really thought English was the idea. I really thought that if I taught art, that having to do it as a job would kill it for me, and so I was like, I don't want to do that. But then I actually ended up doing it because I was like, I'd have to do all these classes and do all these other things I want to teach English. So I thought it's more practical to teach art, even if there's not as many opportunities. And so then I realized once I got into it that it did the exact opposite. It revived my interest in art. And I think if it wasn't for teaching art, I wouldn't have started making my own stuff. Like the stuff that you've seen, that you're aware of, is stuff that I made because of my students, because of my class. I don't want to say that they're, the captive audience, but they're the reason, what kind of teacher is going to, for me, it felt like, what kind of teacher would I be to be trying to tell them about the importance of art if I'm not showing them about how it affects me in a positive way, And so, what started off as I ended up teaching art, and if you'd asked me in my early teaching days, they ask you things like, what's your teaching philosophy? You're just trying to get by and figure out how to do what you're doing, But if you'd asked me in those early days, what I was doing, I think my teaching philosophy hasn't changed so much. And that's because I never had art classes available to me throughout elementary, junior high, high school. There were things that we did here and there, but I never had an art class. So, and I was always super interested in it, and I love stories, and I loved history, and I love culture. So my idea in my early teaching days, and still now, was I wanted to create the classroom that I would have loved to have, And so, yes, we do art, but we do all kinds of other stuff. Nothing is off limits, And I feel like even if that was just kind of something to describe why I was teaching, it feels like, no, that's really what I set out to do, and that's what I've been doing. And because I still see it that way, it hasn't stopped being fun for me, And I think I have fun with it, and my kids do too. And it's a nice give and take,
Something that why it was having you here for an episode, what was so intriguing when I had to do an observation for my master's class so I could get my credential and all of that. And I noticed all your projects that you shared with me and how connected they are to have so you can reflect your students, who you serve, their culture and their identity. And as you know, for me, I know that I've always been of indigenous background. I've always known that. It's not something that was hidden or I just don't have details about what exactly that means. What is, that is the part that has been erased from me. So seeing all those projects in your classroom, it really, I thought, wow, I wish I had you as my teacher any point in my life, because I think that would have expedited this search of wanting to reconnect with my indigenous, heritage a lot sooner than that. But of course, I don't regret it because it's never late.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just really intriguing, and I don't want to give out details because I want you to explain to me and tell us, how did you come about those projects? And the project that I would like to start off is the Mayan hieroglyphic tiles, because absolutely that is by far my favorite. But you have others. So could you give us a little more detail about how did you come up with that idea, and why? Why was it important for you to make sure that your students had that opportunity to create those type of art pieces?
Well, so if my stories seem extremely long-winded, it's because I feel like it's important to see where the origins, where that started. And so I think, like I said earlier, when people ask you, what's your teaching philosophy, and you just started, you're going to say whatever comes to mind, and sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. And so those early years of teaching, I was just trying to get by, and you're creating new curriculum because art teachers don't have a lot of other art teachers to collaborate with or to share curriculum with. And so I would grab wherever I could, and there was cool stuff that I did that I enjoyed doing, but I always found myself trying to connect more to culturally relevant stuff. And unfortunately, what you get taught in college is always overwhelmingly from the European, the Western perspective. And so there's obviously that disconnect, like, well, that's not what my audience looks like. And also, like, for me, I want to teach what makes sense to me, but how do you do that when you don't even know what your background is? And so I think when I started doing that even more intentionally, I think I've always done Dia de Muertos related projects. In my previous school, I played with it, and we had some events around it. And then when I came to San Fernando, I think I really started exploring it there. I think when I arrived at my current school, which is also where I went to high school, I think I knew, like, this is where I'm going to be, and I'm going to get really comfortable. And in so I also decided, maybe not intentionally, but but it happened, and it was necessary. How do I make this more culturally relevant? And it's always been a series of things that push me, and sometimes I think the wind is trying to push me in a certain direction, and it always feels like the right direction. So it was a combination of things. I feel like all these things converged at around the same time. When I arrived at San Fernando, that same year, my best friend took me to, we went to Oaxaca together, to celebrate our 30 years of friendship. We've been friends since we were 5 years old, and I remember being in Oaxaca, and I think like a lot of people, I don't like to speak for more than me, but I do hear it and see it within my friends, family, and my students. We have a very limited view and understanding of our own culture, and so I, being that person now too, to some extent, my understanding of my culture was, okay, we have mariachi music and charros and tacos and and we speak Spanish, and that's it, and we're all like Aztecs or something, right? And I felt very proud of my origins and my parents' pueblos and all that. But when I went to Oaxaca, it was a world. It felt like so incredibly different from what I understood my culture to be. And I'm like, how is this still the same country? Not that makes it bad, but it's like, this is a much more diverse place than I had any idea, And it just so happens that Oaxaca is by far the most diverse state in all of Mexico. They have 16 different indigenous cultures that they recognize with their own language families and traditions, and foods, and there's a lot to do there, right? So, but I was blown away by that, and I think little by little I wanted to see what else there was, and so between that and there's a pulque. Pulque is a drink, but we won't get into that so much. Basically, that was kind of like the catalyst that made me decide, I think I need to explore more. And it's not something that everybody can just readily do, but I decided to explore more, literally state by state. And also, around the same time, I remember somebody told me about this really cool workshop that they were doing through UCLA's Latin American Studies department, that they would put on summer workshops. And sometimes the PDs that they have us do at work are not terribly stimulating or helpful, you know? And so I thought, well, this seems interesting. It's somewhere outside. And I don't know if it was the first or the second year that I went and did this, but I went to their workshops almost every summer. And I remember they brought in professionals, experts, doctors in their fields of archaeology, anthropology, history, people from Mexico, talking about culture, talking about indigenous people, indigenous cultures, you know, and I thought it was so helpful, so rich, so stimulating. And so the Mayan project actually came from one of those workshops, you know. I don't even remember who the person was who presented the material, but they showed us the syllabary. This is what the Mayans use, and I remember thinking like the actual imagery that they use. But then when I visited sites in southern Mexico and in Guatemala too, when I've seen sites that have the carvings of the hieroglyphs, I recognize the images. I couldn't tell you what they say, but I recognize the images. I'm like, that is part of the syllabary, you know? And so we were instructed to make our own names and paint them and draw them. And so when I was in San Fernando, it seemed like this is something I could do. I could have my students create these tiles out of clay, ceramic clay, because that's what I teach, you know, and write their names in Mayan. And it's tricky. It's a really tricky process, but once you get it, I don't want to say it's easy, you know, but it's organized. I love the Mayan writing system. I think it's really, really cool, you know, and for people who actually, and there's a lot of people who speak the language, how easy it is to adapt those two things together, you know? So when I did it, I thought, this is super cool. And I don't know that my kids get now how interesting, how important that is. And it's okay. If they don't get like how cool it is, well, they have this stone that created out of ceramic clay that they fired and is going to last a really long time, that one day when it finally hits, oh wow, I can't believe I just learned an ancient writing system. And they may have forgotten it, but they'll have that evidence as, you know, their receipt, and they can appreciate what it is that they got from it, you know. And so that also led me, like, I do remember the town in Chiapas that I went to. Right now it escapes me, but I got to visit different Mayan sites, some actual old towns, and see how people you know, practice their culture, maintain the language, you know. So I think one of the biggest surprises and things that I brought back into my classroom was this unfortunately narrow and limited view of our culture, who we are, and our indigenous roots. Again, you know, too many of us are like, I'm Aztec. Like, you're probably not. It's very unlikely that you are. You may come from, your descendants might be Nahuatl speaking people. That is more likely, because Nahuatl is the most spoken language in Mexico. After that would be Mayan. And these are language families, so there's variants of each one of these languages, right? So you may descend from Nahuatl-speaking people, and ironically and very likely, you could very well have descended from Nahuatl-speaking people who allied with the Spanish to bring down the Aztecs. So, you know, and historically it's complicated, but, you know, they had an empire, they demanded tributes, people didn't like that, so they're like, screw these guys, we're gonna bring them down, let's help these newcomers to, you know, you're the enemy of your enemy is your friend, you know? And so all these visits that I've made to Mexico and personal investigation and exploration are things that I did for both myself, but I always intended to bring it right back to my classroom, you know. So that's how that specific project got there, and that's how I developed all my other projects. Like I mentioned Oaxaca earlier, I have several projects that, you know, we do that are based or inspired by something that I've seen in Oaxaca, and, you know, the Mayan tile, the alebrijes, Dia de Muertos. I mean, I feel that I don't want to say I'm successful, like game over, done, all right, call it a day. I think it's an ongoing process, but decolonizing the curriculum, as far as I don't talk about, you know, Western art at all. if anything, where people would talk about, when I say American art, I'm talking about the the continents. When people talk about that, especially when it comes to Native Americans or other countries in the Americas, it's always a footnote,
Yeah.
and that doesn't seem right. How can you be teaching culturally relevant instruction when it's only one, or it's a mention, or it's a footnote, and it should be everything. It's so rich. Our cultures are so rich. There's so much to draw from. Why do I have to go anywhere else?
And I think this is why I think I get so excited to hear about what you're teaching. Are you aware of your own indigenous heritage?
No,
Do you
I
know
think
something.
So something I feel like, especially the farther north you go in Mexico, it's I think people lose sight of that, lose track of that thread, because there's just because we understand racism here in the U.S. doesn't mean that the countries where parents come from don't have that. They have it. It just looks a little bit different. It sounds a little different. It's spoken in a different language with a different accent. But it's the same kind of biases. Because it's rooted in colonialism, and so. I think a lot of my extended family, and I love them, and they're good people, but unfortunately, they were taught that we always put on a pedestal the dead Indians, the dead indigenous people, the dead Aztec. They always, I don't want to say worship, but idolized, right? They were our heroes, while ignoring the ones who are very much alive, and othering them. And so when I'd hear at home the way that they'd talk about indigenous people that were around now, they use the common words to what's the word I'm trying to, they would talk about them like they were children, very humble. They were humble people. They were modest, so it doesn't respect their culture, their traditions, their intellect, their strength as a people, but there was always a distinction, like those people and everybody. I recently went to a family reunion where we're trying to connect, like how far we can go, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and in talking about them, there was multiple times in the stories, in the relating that we're talking about, where somebody was like, well, I heard my grandma and I heard my great-grandma or my great-grandpa or so-and-so and so, I heard that they were from Spain. And I feel like several of us who, are trying to dig and find real answers kind of collectively rolled our eyes, because we were like, we know where this is coming from. We know why they're saying that. There's no weight to any of that. These are just things people would tell themselves because they want to feel more European, because that's what they were taught was always the thing you want to aspire to. That gives you more prestige or whatever, And so, nobody's questioning where our melanin comes from, And so that is lost, unfortunately, and the best I can do is based off of the area that my family comes from. I might be able to kind of take a kind of a wild guess still. Like I wouldn't say I'm Mayan, My family's from Jalisco. My mom's from a small town called Totatiche. My dad, the family came from everywhere. The grandparents from my dad's side of the family came from Atotonilco, Los Altos de Jalisco. It's funny because they were very short people. So you make fun of them. They came from Atotonilco, and then from there they went to Ocotlan. My dad was born in Ocotlan, and they went to Guadalajara, and that's where the family pretty much, made their lives. And my family is so mixed. You could make a spectrum of us, My grandmother was like translucent white with green eyes, and my grandfather, her husband, was very, very dark, and actually a lot of us would agree that he had kind of indigenous features, and all the kids in between, some people have very straight hair like me, some people have afros, there are some people with blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, so it's a very colorful family, and all Mexican, all 100% Mexican, but there's no one has come forward in my whole extended family to say, I heard that great-grandma or great-great-grandma, la mamá Toña or el papá Basilio, etc., etc., etc. Nobody's come forward with saying they spoke this language, or they did this thing, or they came from that. But if I had to guess, I don't know, 3 or 4 different guesses that I would throw out. My mom has frequently said that in her pueblo, which is tiny, there's like 5,000 inhabitants, and I'm pretty sure we're all related. So I'm so glad she got out of that town. But in that town, she would refer to the huicholes, which is not the best way to describe them.
Yeah.
They prefer to be called the huijarica. I don't know if I'm saying that part right, but yeah. So that's a possibility. That's a possible thread. From my dad's side, those towns that he came from are much bigger, but there's also huijarica there, or huicholes. There's also them. I have heard of Caxcanes, and that's not as known of a culture. It's funny, I heard about them because of a bottle of tequila. But I met somebody who has those roots, and he's actually from my mom's town, you know, and so he speaks Nahuatl, and so it's a Nahuatl-speaking culture. I think Huijarica has their own culture, their own language. That, I know there's a bit of Purepecha. Purepechas are most dominant in Michoacan. I've heard of Cora too. So I'd narrow it down to 4, but none of that has none of it has legs because I don't know, you know. So, you know, it's just something that I can just learn about in general, but I can't, you know.
So as a person that you are still kind of wondering and trying to figure it out exactly where they're rooted, and possibly you might be able to find out one day, or possibly not. It's really hard to tell just because the intention, like what you said about colonialism, that was their intention, was to make sure that we erase that part of our history, of our heritage, that we wouldn't be able to know our lineage, and that was an intentional act. But how can we change that now? How can we change that narrative now that we're here? And, you know, there are DNA tests that could possibly tell some part of the story, not necessarily details of the story. But how can you gain that back? How can you take control of the narrative? Of that, you being of that person, of the product of all that, because I'm pretty sure, like you, there are many other students that might be in that situation where they can see, well, I know I am something because I see these features, and you know that's the beauty about a lot of our indigenous features is that you cannot erase that. Mm-hmm. It's there, mm-hmm. But we can't quite tell the full story.
Yeah.
What can we do? Like what can we do as the adults, and what can that youth do?
I mean, going off of my process, my investigation, and I say investigation like in a formal way, but it's always been, you know, they look like vacations and trips, you know, just be intentional about those kind of things. Maybe when I went to visit these different states in Mexico and explore these places, it wasn't like, I'm going to write an essay and I'm going to write, I mean, I would always actually take notebooks and write notes of things that I would learn that were interesting, but that's because that's how I am. But maybe, I mean, first off, so you start at home. Whenever I have my students do anything that's culturally related, you know, I always encourage them, especially in the beginning of the year. I'm very nosy and I like to know, but it's like, how do I ask this without, you know? And so I'll ask them, do you have, you know, what's your cultural background, you know? And do you know if you have indigenous roots, you know? And I do say, you know, if you feel comfortable, share, you know, no hay fuerzas. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to share, you know? But I like to know because maybe I can help guide them into, you know, well, go ask this or go find out that, you know? And through that, I've found out kids who may have never mentioned it to me, I found out this kid's family is Mayan, this kid's family is Purepecha, and her dad's very proud. And when there was a parent conference one time, he was so eager to share with me, you know, things that he knew or things about his culture that maybe nobody had ever made him feel, you know. And so starting off at home is important because maybe you will learn stuff, you know, and at the very least, you learn your family stories, you know. So you ask your mom, you ask your dad, your older aunts and uncles, your grandparents if they're still around. You ask them about their stories, where they come from, and they may not know. They may not be able to say for sure, oh, your huichol. But they might tell you something that's revealing, like, oh, when I was a kid, my grandma used to do this and that might be the clue that says, oh, that might be the thing. But if you learn your family's recipes, if you learn their dichos, their expressions, their little traditions, the little things, even every family is like a microculture too, that's a way of leaning into what you have. And not everybody has a way to like just go and travel and explore that way. So I get that, But if you lean into your family and do a little personal research, talk to people who are from similar areas, you might pick up things along the way. And when you do come across people who are from your area, who are indigenous, or even if they're not, but like, listening to their stories, elevating their stories, giving them an opportunity to be heard. Over the years, I get really excited if I have a student, if I learn, because I always ask, especially new students, if I know that they come from, they just immigrated, I'll ask them, about their background, their language, just to see also like where they're at and how comfortable they are with English, with Spanish. But I always ask, and remember a couple of years ago, and even now, I have a student who, his family speaks Mayan. I don't remember which variant, but I remember a couple of years ago. It's so funny that we call them English learners or bilingual education, and that's so reductive. I don't know. It's so presumptuous, because it's like, bilingual? These people already speak 3 languages. What do you mean? Bilingual. It makes me so mad. And so this kid had just come from Guatemala. And so I asked, I was curious. I said, do you speak other languages other than Spanish? And he says, yeah, we speak, a couple of other, he said dialectos. He said, we speak other dialectos. And I said, oh, do you know the names? And I don't remember if he had the name on them at the time or not, but then later on he followed up, and one of them was Ixil, and the other one was, forgot the name of it. It's written on a paper. And so I told him, I said, I have something that you could do. I wrote down a list of phrases in Spanish, and I said, can you translate these to your languages so I can have them just for reference, just something to, and I think showing, you as a teacher, but not even just as a teacher, when you show someone interest, respect, admiration for that, that's a way to elevate them. That's a way to maybe draw them out, And so he brought me those back, and in my classroom, I don't know if I'd shown you that one time, the list of phrases in like 3 different languages,
Yes, I remember.
And so this kid, here he is learning English, and they're labeling him as bilingual. He knows so much more than you do, So, I think there's so many different ways. There isn't one way to try to tap into your roots, Yes, those DNA testing things can help, not very much, because they don't know. They don't have a database on like indigenous cultures and that, so you're not going to get that. I did that, and my results were all over the place, and didn't get anything relating to indigenous, except you have this much percentage of indigenous, they called it Native American from Mexico, blood, And so it's like, well, that's a useless dead end, But I feel like I've learned a lot more from talking to my family, traveling, even if I were to never get, and I may never, but even if I were to never get an answer for that specifically, I feel that even though English and Spanish are both colonized languages, right? The way that our Spanish is spoken, and I think the way we speak any language, the things we say, the phrases we use, the way we speak to each other, have traces of those cultures, because a language houses a whole culture, And so if you lose your indigenous language, unfortunately you do lose a culture, but that doesn't mean that you can't have bits of it embedded into, the other language. I feel like the way I can speak for Mexico, and I don't speak exactly like they do, people who live in Mexico, but I have a lot of it, And I feel like you compare that to Spain, we don't sound alike. We don't even understand each other sometimes. I know, because when I went to Spain, I was like, I don't know what they're saying. That's not what I speak, But even if you don't get to that answer, if you don't get that, doesn't mean that you can't get a lot, as a result of that search. The search in and of itself is worth it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just because you don't get to what you think is the end, maybe it's a blessing, because maybe you get to the end and you're like, now what? I mean, maybe, but the search, the pursuit of that information should hopefully lead you in more directions that you learn about yourself, your family, your people, your area, your culture, and other cultures even more, So.
Yeah. As you're saying I think that's exactly how I'm thinking about my own process, because I'm not sure which dialecto we speak as part of my family, like that is the origin, because that we doesn't get spoken in my family. Even right now in April that I went to see my family in Guatemala, we just didn't get an opportunity to even speak about it. And even though I asked my mom, let's intentionally, like, please ask your aunt, please. But of course, when you see them speaking about this and that, and you don't want to go like, don't forget to ask her. Or even interrupt them and start out your own conversation. Because they're just so happy to see you since we haven't seen each other for a while. So, but she's my last thread of connection that could possibly connect me to more. But in the meantime, in that path of searching to see where the main root is coming from, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to learn one. I'm just going to try to learn one, that even if it's not the one that it belongs to me or my family. But it's true what you're saying. But at least in the process, it will help me connect. And I think that is great. So maybe somebody out there might not know, well, I might be purepecha, or that word that you said. I'm still struggling that I said it to my students.
Huichol?
Huichol.
Oh, Huichol, yeah.
Yeah, and the other one with the X. Because I show them a video, and I'm trying to remember how to say it. I have to write it a few times, so it stays in my head. So that way they can see, like, so you just take one, and with the understanding that you are just taking on that opportunity to open the door. Not necessarily that, this is how I identify myself.
Yeah.
But this is something this is what I'm doing just to reconnect, because, colonials did a good job in that aspect of making sure that culture was erased. And even when saying that, we also have to be aware that they tried, but we were not successful, because many indigenous tribes survived and were never colonized by the Spaniards. So that's something that we also need to remember, that even though Spain and other colonizers they did their very best at being cruel and create this caste system and etc., it's not the erasure of all.
Yeah.
That buildings and towns and stuff like that, it still exists. So we cannot give them that much credit. The only thing we can give them credit is the detail, just the little details, minor details, and that's something that we can fill in the blank with other stuff, just as learners that we are. But it just excites me that you're doing that in class, because just imagine if more teachers took that mission to bring that into the curriculum, regardless if you did art, English, history, math. To me, math, it trips me how much indigenous people have contributed to math, even though there's nothing given in the books giving credit to how much they have contributed. And so I think it will be such a different world if we could actually have more people like you. So I hope that in my class, I begin to do that. I'm excited to show you my ojos de Dios because I started already.
That's really cool.
Yes. So I'm excited to show you the stuff.
It's cool. You know, the sad thing, unfortunately, is that I think what the information that's made available to you in those teaching programs, and even in college, you know, I minored in Chicano studies. It wasn't the thing that my main pursuit, right? And they do talk about a bit about like history, Mexican history. You don't learn about those, you know, a lot of that stuff. You know, you I think there's more of a focal point about, you know, the Mexican American Chicano experience when they arrived here and the politics behind them, the history, and that's all super important. But it's like, well, what else? You know, because my history does not begin here, and my history is not U.S. history. You know, not to say that, you know, I often say I'm not responsible for the sins, you know, or the crimes or whatever, you know. That doesn't mean that we don't have any, you know. But like my family's history, you know, when they arrived, they already had a background that involved their own, you know, shady things. Not specifically my family, but like Mexico also has a very messy history, you know. And this is not just when the Europeans arrived, but after and during colonization, and after independence. So there's plenty crimes and sins to share about there, you know. But those are things that I would have wanted to know, because I feel like, yeah, I feel like I can take responsibility for some of that, because, you know, you do learn those things, these colonialist or colonial views, you know, are so deeply embedded in us that then we go and turn and do it to each other, you know. So it's not like we're without fault, and it's not like, oh, we're perfect, but it's just like a kid that's been adopted who wants to go and search for their roots, their birth parents, right? It's the same thing. We want to know, where do we come from, and why am I this way? Why am I brown? You know, how to learn to like it, you know, unfortunately, how to learn to like that and be comfortable with my own skin color. These are things that we hear. These are things that we still hear now. When I was a kid, I would be told, like, not to get so burnt because you're going to get too dark. And it was, you know, it was very explicitly told that it was not an attractive thing, you know. And so I had to I don't even know how, it was a process, but I had to unlearn that. So we have our own problems to deal with, you know, and being critical of the racism that is experienced here in the U.S. doesn't mean that we don't have it back at home. It just looks different, you know. But the sad thing, I'm always going on tangents, is that I don't think it's easy or feasible to be able as a teacher to be able to teach these things into your curriculum without doing a lot of work. It's just not accessible. And so I feel like I, as a teacher, to do it to kids that much younger, I'm hoping, you know, teenagers, young people in general are young, and so, you know, for them to go and do something with that, you know, I'm not expecting that they're going to go and be anthropologists or historians or archaeologists or artists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At the very least, I'm hoping that they take this information and later on they decide to explore it or appreciate it on their own, you know. But for all of us that are teaching and that are like, where do I get this? That's tough. And so it requires work. And I think, you know, I don't have the hard commitments of a house with a mortgage or kids, you know, of my own. I have a lot more freedom with my time to be able to do that, you know. So I don't want to say, I definitely, I feel like it would be irresponsible to pretend like this is easy. I just go and do what I did. No, that's hard. I also have crazy erratic energy, so I just go. When I go to Mexico, I go with a plan, a real plan. Like sometimes I'm like, I might explore these states. Like this summer alone, I went to 8 different states, you know, and I showed up and I wasn't sure how I was getting from point A to point B. I had my departure flight from here, and that's what I often do. I have my departure flight, but I don't have a return flight, and I have a rough idea of where I want to end up and a rough idea of when I want to come back, but I don't know where I'm going to be and how long I'm going to be and how I'm getting anywhere, where I'm staying, you know. So, but I think it's I know people are like, she's crazy.
Yeah, that's giving me anxiety.
I know.
Because I like to know all those
That's how.
the answers to those questions.
That's how. I mean, I could tell you. I remember how I did it. You know, something I've learned is that everywhere I travel in Mexico, you know, the buses, people can travel by buses, and every city has like a central de autobuses. And not just Mexico. When I was in Guatemala, when I was in Costa Rica, same thing. You know, everywhere you can find that. You know, I'm not gonna fly everywhere. That's expensive. You know, so every time I arrive anywhere, I immediately look for where is the central de autobuses so that I know where I can go. I go online, I see what their departures are, where they're going, you know, and yeah, it's a little crazy. I'm not gonna lie. My family and my friends get nervous when I leave because they're like, is she okay? Where's she gonna be? What's she gonna do? I'm okay so far, knock on wood. But sometimes I plan a little bit more. I mean, I will say that this summer and where I went, I arrived in Monterrey, Nuevo León. Then I went to Saltillo, Coahuila, Aguascalientes, Zacatecas, Guadalajara to visit family. Then from there I went to Acapulco, Guerrero, Cuernavaca, Morelos, and then Mexico City. And I usually end in Mexico City because direct flights, and I love going to Mexico City. And that was roughly my plan. I wanted to go to some other states, but I decided to cut them out because I was like, I think I've had enough. 8 states for one summer is good, but that's
a lot.
Yeah. So it's I would not. Well, actually, I would recommend people doing it this way, but I understand that it's not feasible or easy, or maybe some people would probably get anxiety traveling the way I do.
Yes, right here.
Yeah, I when I've traveled with my parents, I don't do that to them. I've tried. But I remember a few years ago, you know, I told my parents, I'm like, ¿Qué hubo? ¿Vamos a Guadalajara? And like, they're like, yeah, you know, ¿a quién le dan pan que llore? They're like, of course, you know, let's go. I'm like, all right, my treat. And them and my sister and a cousin of mine, knowing how I am, they'd ask me every so often, did you book the hotel? No, not yet. I'm getting to it. Did you do this? What's your plans? I'm like, I don't know. What are you gonna do? We're gonna stay, you know. And so they're like, here, let us book you a hotel. This is our gift to you. But they were just nervous, you know. And even though we only stayed in Guadalajara for like a week, while we were there, I like to walk everywhere. I have a lot of energy that I need to expend. So I'm like, yeah, I'll just walk from here to here to here to here, you know. And my parents are older, you know. They're not. Well, I mean, they're older. I don't like to say they're old because we're all in denial. But I was like, oh, we're just gonna walk over here. It's not far, you know. Está luego. Unas cuadras. Half an hour later, they're like, are we there yet? So they're scared of me. I realize that the way that my pace and my energy and the way I move is not for everybody, and it's not easy to maintain. Sometimes I can't even keep up with myself. You know what happens is sometimes I'll travel and I'm moving around so much, I'm walking around so much for days and days and days. Like I can average like 10 plus miles a day, and I think I can keep going, and then I get sick because my body's like, you know what, game over. We need a break, so you're gonna have to stop. So I stop, you know. Yes, I travel alone. So everything that I do, all the crazy things that I do all by myself. And not anymore so much, but initially I would lament that I didn't have somebody to share it with. But then when I would take photos and videos, every time I do, I always do it with the intention that I'm sharing this with my parents, with my extended family, with my friends, and with my students. So it makes me feel less alone because I feel like I'm doing it for them. I will go explicitly to places. My dad loves YouTube. He's always looking at random travel videos. He's that person that's just obsessing over YouTube stuff. So he sends me stuff. He's the one that sent me to go to Chihuahua and check out the Copper Canyon, Las Barrancas del Cobre. I love that. And so because of him, I went there. And so when I see that, I remember taking a video specifically in the morning, like early morning, seeing the train arrive into the station with the backdrop of the mountains. And I wouldn't have done it for myself, so I did it explicitly for my dad, and other things that I do for different family members.
You know what? I don't blame you. When I travel, I love being just a viewer and not. And when I know I have to take pictures, I forget because I love being in the moment more so than having to worry about, oh, let me take a picture or record it. It does distract. It does slow you down. So yeah, it's just cool. It would be cool.
It would be. Like if somebody comes to me and they're like, here, let me take all that and do something with it and whatever, But I'm too everywhere to just stop. Stopping is hard. It hurts,
Oh, stopping, I usually fall asleep.
Yeah. So
everywhere. Like when we travel, like we were in the car, I was asleep.
Yeah.
We stopped somewhere, I fell asleep.
Uh-huh.
I can't stop.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Yeah.
Now, what is your future plan for your life, your path, your students? What is next for you?
I feel like, what's cool is that all the cool things that I do, started off as like, I want to do this little thing. It was never like, oh, I'm going to do this grand thing. But the more I do, the more I see, the more I learn and explore and take in. The more I'm like, these little plans just start to snowball and become these massive things. So that the Dia de Muertos event that's coming up on Wednesday, October 29th, 2025 at San Fernando High School, 5 p.m., that was a little thing that when I was at school one day and it literally it popped into my head, it'd be cool, we should do something for Dia de Muertos. And I asked one of our, not our admin, but she kind of played it, she was like our curriculum coach at school. I said, we should do this. And she said, yeah, go for it. That's all I needed, the green light. And so I started planning and I reached out to our music teacher at San Fernando High School, who's amazing. And he's like, yeah, I'll help you. And he was my collaborator. And that was year one. We did it. There was a lot of people. I don't know if you guys went the first year.
Which year was it?
2022. And it wasn't where it was last year. It was in front of the auditorium. I don't know if you guys went that year.
No. Well, maybe, but I didn't.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I think Ajupema did go. Then the following year, it got so much bigger, And so the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes, the things that are in the future, something little, and who knows, that little thing is a speck on the horizon that you're driving towards, and it's just going to get bigger as you get closer. Similarly, I'm not trying to make the Dia de Muertos event bigger than it is because, I don't want to get to the point where it's something that's unsustainable or that we are too focused on outdoing ourselves, that it's something that it's difficult for us to do. I feel like it should continue to be something sustainable. I'm not saying that there's not room for improvement. So that on that front, I hope we continue doing it for a very long time, and keep working with other schools, and collaborate. For me personally, I'm going to start a master's program in 2-3 weeks at UCLA for Latin American studies. It's funny, when I first started going to their workshops in their Latin American studies department, I remember right away, back in like 2019, 2020, I thought it'd be really cool to do a master's in something like this, to like really dive into this. And this was before I visited 28 states out of the 32 states that there are in Mexico. And that was before then. I feel like now is a good time. Now, considering a lot of the things that are happening, I'm not going to lie, the catalyst for me applying to the program was the election. I thought things are not going to be easy for us. And I think that not just the results, but who and how people voted were a result of, I don't think our community knows enough about themselves, values themselves, is as educated as they should be. And so I'm going back to educate myself more, and my intention is to bring it back into my classroom and probably more. In fact, what you were saying earlier about more teachers need to do this, well, something that I think I'd like to pursue after is how can I use whatever I'm going to get out of this program to then hopefully help educate and arm future teachers that want to take this on. How can I facilitate the process so it's not as crazy and erratic and as painful? I mean, I love the process for me, but like not everybody can do that. So how can we give this to teachers, so that new teachers, so that they appreciate, they understand why it's important, why they should teach it? Because I will say, I've tried to bring this as a PD, and maybe it's a part of me that just feels like, well, who am I to tell them I'm just your colleague, I'm not an expert in the field. But there's no such thing. You're a constant student. But I feel there's a certain something to having the title, the paper behind it, or whatever. Or maybe even additional resources that I may pick up along the way that are going to help equip me in maybe bringing this, providing this, facilitating this for other teachers. New and experienced, I've been teaching for how many years? 13, I think. No, 15? I don't know. I lost count. I've been teaching for 15 years. I still feel like a rookie. I feel like there's still a lot to learn. And so I'm really hoping to be able to get something out of this program that I can bring to my students and bring to other future teachers. People ask, well, why don't you teach college? Isn't that better with what you want to do? I feel like it's too late. I think young people have made a decision to pursue a certain type of education and life experience when they're already there. And I'm not saying that doesn't have value. Of course it does. But I want to get them before they made that decision. And you know what? Even for the kids that wouldn't do that, I feel that the kid that's going to, and I say this because I have a lot of these kids that are going to pursue barber school, trade school, whatever they're going to pursue, you can still have a curiosity for yourself, for your culture, for life, and pursue that on your own. You can still educate yourself without, pursuing formal higher ed, and still be a well-rounded individual. So I want to keep getting the kids while they're young and see how I can help teachers. Gatekeeping is not a helpful thing at all,
Yeah.
So
it's funny with that term, gatekeeper, because I understand, like, you are keeping others from getting through, but for me it's like, but you're actually keeping the doors open.
Yeah,
but
that's what we want, isn't it?
Yeah, the doors open so people can go through and find their path. Not to tell them this is what you need to do because I think this will be better for you, but rather than begin somewhere. Begin somewhere. Be curious. Dictate what you want to know. Don't let someone else tell you what you should know. And that's like what's really important for me. Like I tell students, I want you to be the owners of your education. Not me telling you what to think or what to feel or tell you that this is good or this is bad. Including art. And that was one of the things I told them too. This is not going to be about, oh, you're such a great artist, or oh, you're such a great painter, blah blah blah. No, everyone that walks in, you're automatically an artist. Period. Yeah. And that's it. So all of us are going to go through that process because that's what an artist does. And I think that's, even though it is specific to art because that's the subject, but that's actually true for anything in life. You are a learner when you walk in and decide to be a learner.
Yeah. In the class, a lot of kids have this idea, well, I'm not an artist. And it always saddens me because I think that they're incapable of doing this thing that they do have a respect for, right? And even so right now we're doing our little pinch puzzles. We're finishing our first project. And some of them are doing some cool little things with these little bowls. But they ask me, what do you think? And, they're asking because they want me to kind of give them an informal assessment, some feedback. And I think something that I feel like is a good thing to do is to ask them, no, what do you think? How do you feel about it? I want to know because it's more valuable to me to know what they think about their own work, how they feel about it. And the nice thing is always, I love seeing my kids be excited about their work. I love saying, like, seeing them get excited and show me, like, look, isn't this cool? And I'm like, you won. You won. The grade doesn't matter. You won. If you love this, if you're enjoying this process,
Yeah.
if you want to do something that you don't know how to do, or if I can guide you to do it, we're winning, you know? And I've been seeing this already, and I'm like, it's so early in the year and we're already getting this excitement. I'm like, we're on a good track, you know? So that's super cool. And, you know, teaching enthusiasm is not easy, you know,
It's
curiosity and enthusiasm for something.
It's not.
Yeah.
I get so much. Is this okay?
I
Is this what you say? And I'm
know.
like, don't ask me that. Don't
Yeah.
ask me that. Because I'm going to tell you that it's okay, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
I want you to experience the process.
Yeah.
Feel the process.
Yeah.
Trust the process.
Yes.
And I have these students. They're already repeating my words. Trust the process, dude.
I love it. It's so funny when they say it to each other. I like it when they say that. You know, I try to make a distinction, especially with ceramics. There's certain rules, you know. It's not like this art is right and this is wrong. You know, there's art that I don't care for, but it doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just my personal bias, my personal aesthetic, you know. But there's certain rules that you do have to abide for, because in ceramics, you know, if you don't do things a certain way, they will explode when I try to fire them in the kiln, you know. And so I get to say that. I get to do, well, I like your idea, but it will explode. We need to do the thing following these rules. How, you know, your end product, you know, that's on you, you know. And teaching them craftsmanship, of course, you know. But their ideas, whatever they want to do with it, that's the most important thing, you know.
Like the clean lines, make sure, like, yeah, that's that type of stuff.
Those are
yeah.
those are doable. Those are
Yeah.
things that you can teach them.
Absolutely. Like always, I enjoy our talks. I really do. It makes me excited about teaching. It makes me less afraid of teaching art.
You know what? Here's a good takeaway for teaching art. Probably every art teacher probably every school, is probably going to be the only one, or, you know, there's a few, but there's not that many. You know, there's always one or two art teachers at a school. You are the only person in that school that can do what you do as well as you do, and if there's other people who do it, they're not in the classroom. And so I joke that, like, you can't, like, my admin, you know, they're concerned about that, which they're not, unfortunately. But if they were, they wouldn't be able to do it, you know. When I'm absent, I tell my students, and I try to create an atmosphere of community. I teach them to lean on each other, you know, to get along with each other, to lean on each other, to depend on each other, because if I'm out, nobody else can help them. So those routines, they need to have down, that knowledge that we actually use every single day. It's not like a list of vocabulary words that you can learn today and forget tomorrow. You know, all that stuff needs to be practiced, and that community is what's going to help them do what they do and to do it well, you know. And so that's the nice thing, is that if you're not doing it right, who would know? Make up the words. No one's gonna know. No one's gonna know. You know? It's true. You know, that's why we can make up our own curriculum. I mean, it's not like you're making it up. That's a cool thing about teaching art. You could also, like, teach whatever you want. If I want to teach Norman Rockwell, I kind of did before when I did drawing and painting. I should find a way to do that in ceramics. But my point is, you can teach whoever you want, whatever you want. You know, there's no real standard. You have to teach this. You have to teach that, and it has to be done in this order. Not really. If you look at the standards, you can make it work, you know.
Oh yeah, I do remember one teacher saying, you know, don't worry about the standards, because the likelihood that you're teaching the standards, you're teaching the standards.
You are.
Yeah.
It feels like you're not, because you're not, like, thing is, it's just like, it's like what we're saying about traveling, is that, like,
Oh yeah,
you're like,
but that's
it's the same thing in that, like, you know, in saying you should stop and take this and narrate and do something with these videos, you know. And I feel like, well, that's slowing me down, and it's not like I'm not taking this information, internalizing, and doing it something with it. Same thing when teaching art. Just because you're not looking at all the things that you're supposed to do in these standards and checking them off and making sure you're doing it, you're probably doing it a lot worse if you're trying to overthink it.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's a natural thing, and you're already doing the process by teaching those things, you know. So
see,
have fun with it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am having fun with it, and I do have to thank you for that.
Oh,
So thank you. Great inspiration in this area.